Welcome to episode 2 of Off the Record. I'm here with Darren. Tell us a bit about yourself, Darren.
Thank you so much for the invite, first of all.
Of course.
Forward to our conversation.
Of course.
So I got into electronic music kind of early 90s sort of time. Around 93, 94 was when I really started to kind of go, what is electronic music? But I got into raving kind of later in the 90s when I kind of reached appropriate age. So that was the start for me. I've been obsessed with electronic music pretty much for that entire time.
Yeah.
Numerous radio shows over the years, starting off with KISS, in fact. So I was first on KISS FM in 1999.
Yep.
Now, these days, I host a weekly show every Monday night called Positive Education, which I guess is sort of similar to the vibe you're going for in this show. It's sort of all about new school, of course, but I'm always I want to keep the old school alive.
Yeah.
And that's, it was obviously where that passion really came for me. And I really want to keep that going. And I think the direction we're going is really important, but that's ultimately driven from the direction that we've come from. So,
yeah, of course. And we're in a very interesting location right now. Do you want to tell us about, where we are?
So sitting, obviously, with Shed 14, what's left of Shed 14 behind us.
Yeah.
This was pretty much the raving mecca for Melbourne, this kind of whole docks area. And for me, the very, very first raves that I went to were in this area, not this shed. This shed was the second rave that I went to, and many, many post. So a really important part of the Melbourne rave scene down here. So honestly, I don't think we could have picked a better location.
I'd love for you to sort of take us back, that very sort of first one that you went to. What was that sort of experience like? Because I'm guessing this sort of music, it was sort of kind of fresh, kind of new, these kind of parties, they're a little bit new. So kind of going into that without having sort of any prior, I guess, knowledge of what that was like how was that? Sort of talk us through it.
It was incredible, but it was also a little bit surprising because I didn't really realise what I was walking into. So for me, as per a lot of people in Melbourne, their experience was really based upon club nights for the most part. And there were raves that Hardware in particular were throwing. I mean, Hardware's first rave was New Year's Eve 1991. Right. So by the time that I got into the Hardware parties, they were already sort of in the teens, right? Hardware 14 was the first one that I went to. So for me, the experience prior to that was about club experience. So we used to go to various clubs around the city. I personally went to the casino quite a bit, which was cheesy as fuck, right? But there was a club there called Heat.
Nice.
Which was a bit of an institution. A friend of mine had been to a rave and she said, you need to come and see this for yourself. All right. This whole docks area has obviously changed enormously in this time. So you've got to imagine this as mostly sheds like that used to be.
Yeah.
All these buildings, Marble Stadium didn't exist, right? So pretty much everything from here up to the train line was just empty space. They were getting out of the car, you could hear the bass, you could hear the hum. And the sheds were quite unique as well. Maybe at Pica in Port Melbourne, you sort of get a similar experience. But the sheds were much more enclosed here. And so the sound was really sheltered inside, and the buzz, the hum that you would get from the bass was not anything that I've experienced at any other place. Walking in was just this, the sound literally would hit you, the bass you would feel, right? Everyone was just, we arrived like relatively early and the place was going nuts.
Yeah.
Right? A little bit different. I was thinking about this yesterday. I've noticed going to parties these days, you kind of go, at least my experience has been, you kind of go to a spot on the dance floor and then you kind of go, I'm bored here, I'm going to go over there now. Yeah. And people call you and you end up going down the back for a bit and you're out chilling, whatever, right? There's a lot of movement. For all of my early raves, we literally would find a spot, and it seemed like a lot of other people did this too, and you've then got neighbours for the whole of the rave, and no one really moved around too much. Our stuff was in the middle of us, we kind of had our own space. So I've found, and I get frustrated a bit at raves, I'm getting bumped and pushed by people, right? You're kind of in a zone and you're just in the right place, and then your concentration's broken as someone kind of breaks that. You know, it just seemed, I don't know, it felt to me a little bit more, it was a little bit more calm, if that's the right word to use.
So you sort of mentioned hardware there. How were a lot of them like organized? Was it, I guess you call them like companies sort of like that, or were they a lot smaller to sort of start out with, or were they DIY, or what was sort of go-to and like how these events were sort of planned and put together?
So kind of prior to my time a bit, I've heard stories, lots of stories from friends, kind of more in the early 90s, where they were a little bit more do-it-yourself. There were kind of crews that got together and, you know, had a decent sound system, and they were in abandoned warehouses or places that weren't kind of sanctioned. There was obviously the risk, of police presence or being shut down completely, and I have heard of stories like that. They seem to be much more prevalent in Sydney than in Melbourne. But for me, by the time I got into kind of more established parties, it was run by companies, maybe is a little bit of a loose term. You know, Hardware Records existed obviously at that time. Hardware Records had a store just off Chapel Street for 10 or 15 years. That was certainly a bit of a hub from a music point of view, as well as the event side. But there were different crews that put on parties. So there's Earthcore, which used to do it out in the bush. Their music at the Earthcore parties were more kind of acid infused. The parties in the city were kind of a little bit more techno focused. Techno's obviously changed, evolved obviously over the years, right? Over the decades. Back then it was very tribal, very, very, very drum, very percussion driven sound. So Hardware Records they pretty much had a stranglehold on the proper established parties at the time. They would bring out all of the best talent. Laurent Garnier came here for Hardware 4, I think it was, and I've heard stories of this, right? They're just these infamous parties. It was like 5,000 people or so there, it's a lot, right, for those days. So the scene was still quite new and fresh, but it was really coming to life in a big way. And the parties that I went to from, that 98 period, so the one for me that I often talk about as a life-changing party was Jeff Mills, which was in 1998, right here. And like most people, my musical journey was very commercially focused to begin with. It was what you heard on Triple J or what you were hearing in the clubs. The whole underground scene was still really hidden to me at that point in time. So when I went to see Mills play, there was this kind of moment of, this is what it is really. From a club point of view, the go-to clubs, Metro was a really, really big one in the city. It's now a hotel, just as that last year, I think. Where else? Dome nightclub, the Mansion was huge. Q Bar was another really big one down near Chapel Street. There's also Billboards, which 170 Russell.
Still there.
Still
going strong.
Many parties there. There was also a bit more of a focus back then, and from a club point of view, club nights were really prevalent. So there were club nights Thursday through Sunday, and they were just on every single week. So a lot of people would kind of go to these parties, and weave that into then the larger Hardware parties that were run obviously on the weekends. But for a while, Hardware were going through a period where they were putting on parties like not every week, but close. What they had built, and the raving scene here in Melbourne was one of the best in the world. Had a big following, and I'll often and always describe it as some of the best times in life. Amazing experiences, the best memories. Good times. I'd love to relive it. Amazing.
We relived it the other week with Sasha.
That's it. We did. We gave it a nudge, didn't we?
We gave it a nudge. On that, just like sort of what you mentioned about Hardware Records and sort of that, I'd love to understand more about how you found new music or new artists. Like this is, a time before Spotify or sort of anything like that. Like how was it that you would uncover them, or, you'd go out to a show and you'd hear a song, like there's no Shazam, like how what was that sort of like in music discovery?
It was a very different place to where we are now. Record stores were huge in that context. So there were numerous of them around in Melbourne. Chapel Street was a little bit of a hub for record stores. There were a couple in the city, but Chapel Street was really where it was at. So those record stores were huge, and Kiss FM was a really good way to source music also, because Kiss used to run a top 10 of every single day. And so for the tunes that we had heard, the weekend before, you often would hear them played on Kiss in that slot. And then that was the way to find out what it was.
Yeah.
So it was very, very different. But a lot of time for me personally, because I was DJing as well, I was going into record stores, listening to records, talking to, the owner or whoever was working there. You build a bit of a relationship with them. And then you can sort of go, okay, it's this style track and it sounded like this, or it had this vocal, or it had this element, and it could be this. Yes. And I can't even overstate like the feeling, the elation that you would feel on actually finding a track ID.
Yeah.
It was like this enormous thing. Sometimes, oftentimes actually, a lot of the DJ booth setups, they weren't necessarily a stage. It was actually all dance floor level. So you could interact with the DJ very easily.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I would literally just kind of go up and go, hey, what was that track 2 tracks ago? Oh, what, this one? Yes. Right? Brilliant.
Yeah.
Locked.
Yeah.
Straight to Hardware Records at DMC.
Yeah.
The records that I did purchase have a lot more sentimental value to me now than the music that I buy now.
Yeah, just because of that whole mission of, like you said, like that whole journey and story of having to go and find it, and like once you get it, like Shazam's crazy now, but before that it would have been an absolute nightmare. How'd you actually find out about, I guess, the parties or the artists that were coming over? Like, I guess before social media and stuff. Like, how were the event groups like communicating what was coming up?
So word of mouth was really big.
Yeah.
The record stores, there were billboards, there were like posters at the record stores that was a really, really good way of doing it. Kiss FM as well was where a lot of it was discussed. And so, I used to listen to Kiss enormous amounts, right? And in those days, still do a lot, but then was even more, right? And you would often hear about new artists. They'd play different types of music, and then there'd often be connections into, well, this artist is coming here, in the next whatever period of time. There was also a lot of flyers back then. It's a funny kind of paradox with the scene at that time. It was very busy. There were a lot of people who were really keen on it, but it also felt really calm and really kind of really controlled from an individual point of view. So it felt a little bit more intimate in terms of that experience that you have, even though it was so busy and thriving. And the community really came together really well. So Plur, I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. So it was a really big thing.
Yeah.
It's a really big focus there a lot of the time in those early days. That kind of sense of community was still so new. It was so fresh. It was raw. And yet it had this kind of caring side where everyone came together really well. Personally, and I know for a lot of my mates, if Willie was playing, we would be there. It would be that. It didn't really matter what party it was. It didn't matter who was organising it. It didn't matter where it was. We were there to see him. And, I'm sure you've got that now with newer DJs, but there were less to choose from back then, right? So word of mouth in those types of scenarios, that was a really big deal, right?
What do you think, like going from, I guess, that period of, the late 90s and 2000s sort of up until now, like I'm sure there's been a lot of shifts and changes that you've probably noticed, being a part of it. What do you think, like, I guess some of those changes have been, or what's something that you've, definitely noticed has shifted?
I reckon the thing for me is Welcome 2000 was a really big turning point. So it was like start of a new decade, new millennium, right? Like it was a really big deal and a really amazing party. But they also ran Summer Days, and Summer Days was New Year's Day party. And I don't know the exact count of how many went to that Summer Days on 2000, but it was a lot. I'm guessing 10, 15,000, right? Those type of parties was sort of, there was a little bit of a process of coming out of the underground a bit, right? It was a little bit more, it was I don't want to say commercial because it wasn't. It was still underground in nature. The music that was being played was still very much underground. But the fact that it was happening at a much larger scale was a bit of a turning point. It led to larger parties. It led to more focus as well from a community point of view and a government point of view. It just received more attention, and it kind of changed the scene a little bit as a result of that. I'm not saying for better or worse. It just changed it. Moving from that more underground feel to a more sort of commercial setting was quite a big shift. But for me, I guess the thing that I focus on more so is more maybe from a more musical perspective and the way that sounds have changed over the years, and genres and subgenres, and how ones that were, trance was so massive in the 90s and then just kind of seemed to die down quite a lot, and it's having a resurgence, right, for the last couple of years. Just some of those kind of just musically the shifts, that they were definite natural turning points as well that really, really good. I love the evolution of that, right? Like you can't define that as good or bad. It just changed a lot. But the commercial angle, as I mentioned, that's probably the one thing around that 2000 mark, things started to change a little bit. Became, you were getting like, what's the word I'm looking for? Sponsored events by companies, right? By commercial companies, drink companies and alcohol companies, right? Like that kind of stuff didn't exist. You didn't, the bar was just, it was just the bar. There wasn't even advertising on it, right, of any kind. When Melbourne lost the docks for parties, I think that was a really big loss for the scene. We were so lucky to have this space, really. It was desolate for the most part. As soon as apartments started to show up, that's where things really started to change, because all of a sudden parties that would finish at 9 or 10 a.m, no, can't do that anymore, like 5 a.m. started to become more of a limit, or 6 or 7. But with any of this stuff, you make hay while the sun's shining, right? Like we had the space and it was incredible. That doesn't mean that just because we lost that area that the scene changed so dramatically. It was not like all hope was lost at that point to be able to throw amazing parties. Of course not. It's still being thrown to this day, right? We adapt. We find new locations. That's why I really like venues like Pico, right? I've only been there once, twice, but that's got much more of the old school feel of raving here. That's the closest thing in Melbourne that I've experienced to the original raves, a venue like that.
There's another one up in the north called the Wool Store, which
I'm in there.
It just feels so enormous. So there's definitely the spaces out there for it, I guess, which is still good, but it just, from all the stories that you've told me, and I guess what we've talked about today, like this would have been just so otherworldly, you know what I mean? And
it really was.
And so still really accessible as well, like just being sort of this close to the city, like, I don't think there's, peak is still a bit of a mission out sort of thing. So.
Particularly when the rave finishes and you're kind of like, how do we get out of here? Everybody's out there and you're trying to get Ubers or get on a bus or something, and there's just people all over the place. Look, it was similar here, but oftentimes in the morning, there were numerous people who had like really crazy car system, like sound systems in their cars, and the party would continue.
Little renegades.
Often.
Nice.
Like, that was a thing for a while.
That's awesome.
And you're walking out, the sun's shining, and you're humming whatever your favorite track was from the party that you just walked out of. And then some people are like raving at the end. You're like, let's go over there and make some friends.
That's awesome. And we talked a little bit about the shifts and changes that have happened. What's one thing that you think, like, I guess, like a modern day raver or the scene that exists now could learn from how it sort of happened sort of back then?
So I feel like lately, some of the parties that I've attended, even played at, they struggle a little bit. They feel a little bit disjointed. The original parties I used to go to, there was a bit more of a flow. There was kind of momentum through the night. And, for the hardware parties, as an example, there was Jay Snipe, Jeff Tyler, Damien Laird, Simon Digby, Willie Tell, Richie Rich, of course. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. They were kind of like they were the kind of staple, they were the resident DJs. You'd have an international that would then kind of slot, obviously, in the middle of that. But they were all very known entities, known quantities, and they bounced off each other really well musically. Find these days, a lot of the time, because you've got so many more DJs, so many more artists, which is wonderful, right? But you get a bit more of a mishmash, and it's harder to find that flow. You're not quite sure what you're going to get. We also seem to give a lot of creative license to DJs with their time to play almost whatever they want. And I'm not suggesting that that be curated by the promoter. It's not what I'm advocating for. But you can find that someone's kind of playing a certain genre, a certain speed, and the next DJ is going, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go in this direction. And it leads to a little bit of a lack of continuity when it comes to the overall night. Sometimes too, because there's a lot of artists, you'll have a party that's similar length as ones that I used to go to in the 90s, but you have so many more DJs packed into that. For me, I personally love longer sets, right? I'd rather play 2 hours than 30 minutes, I want to be able to tell a story and have a journey for my segment and ultimately through the whole night, really, right? You want some connection through that night. I feel like that's been lost a little bit. The other thing for me is the mystery, and you can't recapture that. I think that time has come and gone because it was so new to the city that anything that is brand new is going to be unique and special in its own way. You never want to kind of, if you could put that in a box, I'd relive every party I went to with such pleasure, You can't do that. So the mystery has just been lost a little bit. We would often go to parties by promoters that we trusted, and Hardware for me personally was kind of probably at the top of that list. Even if I didn't know who the headline act was, it didn't matter, right? I was kind of relinquishing I was just in their hands, right? You play what you think, and I'm going to have a great, you just kind of lost yourself in it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Now with social media, people, artist presences and just the way the network kind of clings together, it's very, very different. And it's different for me now too, right? If I'm going to see a specific DJ, previously we didn't have a way of sharing set times, right? Sometimes you'd have set times put up on the wall at the actual party, but you found that out when you got there, right? So we generally got there early, left late, right? Like that, you were there for that whole experience. Now, even for me, I go, oh, okay, I want to see that. All right, he's on at 2, so I guess I'll get there at about 1, It's kind of, it just plays a little bit differently. That mystery is sort of lost a little bit because then I'm not experiencing really who's before and who's after. I'm just going for who I'm going for. You can't get any of this back, but that's unique, in terms of the times that we had in the 90s, because you would go to these parties, you may know some of the DJs and light acts that were playing. You wouldn't know all of them. It didn't even matter. It was about immersing yourself and relinquishing that control for that night to the artists that were playing music for you. And I haven't felt that feeling for a while. Is that right?
Yeah. Thank you very much for having a chat, and thanks for everyone for watching. Definitely check out Positive Ed Monday nights, Kiss FM. Keep it locked.
8:30.
8:30. But I guess thanks, Daz. See you at the next one.
Cheers.